It's the late 1980s. We're in a small town hidden deep in the towering redwood forests of Northern California, a place called Scotia. On the surface, it looked like the American dream. There were steady jobs, quiet streets, and families building their lives under the shadow of the giant trees. Here's the interesting thing about Scotia. It wasn't like most other towns. Scotia didn't belong to the people who lived there. It belonged to the company, Pacific Lumber Company, otherwise known as Pelco. They owned the houses, the stores, even the schools. For over a century, they called the shots, and for a long time, people didn't mind. The trees were plentiful, the mills were booming, and the paychecks kept rolling in. But all of that was about to change. Not because of a wildfire or market crash, or even the forests running dry. What happened to Scotia was cold and calculated. It started with a hostile takeover. Wall Street sharks, corporate raiders, men who saw the redwood forest not as a way of life, but as dollar signs. It triggered one of the most bitter, violent, and heartbreaking battles in modern American history. We're talking environmental activists chaining themselves to trees, loggers fighting to save their livelihoods, and even murder. You heard that right. An entire town driven to the edge, and at the center of it all, greed, pure, unfiltered, ruthless greed. Most people have never heard this story, but once you do, you'll never look at all those towering redwoods or corporate America the same way again. So stick with us, because what happened in Scotia, it's not just a history lesson. It's a reminder that history has a habit of repeating itself, for better or worse. The story of Pacific Lumber starts way back in 1869, when the gold rush was cooling off and the real fortune of California was standing quietly in the forests. The redwood trees of California, some towering over 300 feet tall, older than the Roman Empire itself. These ancient giants can take over 1,000 years just to reach maturity, and some of them have stood here for more than 2,500 years. Pacific Lumber saw dollar signs, and they weren't the only one. But here's what set Pelco apart. They didn't just come for the quick cash, at least not in the beginning. For decades, Pelco had a reputation as a paternalistic company. That's a fancy way of saying, we'll take care of you as long as you play by our rules. They built the town of Scotia from the ground up. Company-owned homes, company-owned stores, even the schools, the hospital, and the fire department were all Pelco. Generations of families worked in the mills, logging the forests, raising their kids in the little town known as Scotia. It was a classic company town, sure, but Pelco took care of its own. The trees kept falling, the mills kept running, and for over 100 years, Scotia thrived. But unfortunately, that stability, it wouldn't last. Because in 1985, a man named Charles Hurwitz showed up. Hurwitz was a Houston financier, and what Wall Street likes to call a corporate raider. His company, Maxxam Corporation, was to pull off a hostile takeover of Pacific Lumber. And overnight, everything changed. See, Hurwitz wasn't in it for the forestry traditions or community pride. He saw profit, and fast profit. And the fastest way to do that? Clear cutting. The old Pelco had practiced selective harvesting. Careful, sustainable logging designed to keep the forests and the company alive for generations. After more than a century of sustainable logging, everything changed when Wall Street took control. The new owners weren't interested in balance, they wanted quick profits. Clear cutting ramped up, stripping entire hillsides bare in a matter of weeks. They didn't just strip the land, they stripped the rivers, the fish, and the future. When the rains came, there was nothing to hold the soil. Mud and silt washed down into the Eel River and its tributaries, choking the waterways. The gravel beds that salmon relied on for spawning, buried. Without the towering redwoods to shade the streams, the water temperatures rose. And when the salmon disappeared, so did a way of life. The fishing industry, already hanging by a thread, took another blow. All collateral damage in the name of profits. Environmentalists were outraged. Loggers were terrified. They knew what would happen when the trees ran out. But it wasn't just the land that paid the price. Eventually, layoffs swept through the mills. The new owners didn't just cut trees, they cut corners. They cut jobs, and they pushed the remaining workers to the edge. Soon, the fight to save the redwoods and the town would ignite into open warfare. Environmentalists, loggers, millionaires, activists chaining themselves to thousand-year-old trees, and one young woman who refused to come down for a whole 2 years. The Battle of the Redwoods is about to begin.
If you think stories like this need to be told, hit that like and subscribe. It helps us keep digging into America's hidden history.
The tension in Humboldt County didn't fade. It exploded. On one side, environmentalists, young, passionate, and determined to stop the destruction of California's last old-growth redwood forests. On the other, loggers, working-class families fighting to hold on to their jobs, their homes, and their way of life. In the middle, the trees. Some of them had been standing for over 1,000 years, taller than skyscrapers, older than Christianity. And with Hurwitz's aggressive clear-cutting in full swing, these giants were falling fast. Enter Earth First, a radical environmental group known for bold and often dangerous tactics. Road blockades, mass protests, and one of the most controversial, tree spiking. Activists would hammer metal or ceramic spikes deep into the trees, hidden from sight. The idea is simple. If a saw hit the spike, it could shatter, destroying the equipment and even injuring the workers. It was meant to stop the chainsaws, but it also sparked outrage, especially from the people whose livelihoods depended on the timber industry. Earth First was loud, fearless, and willing to put their bodies on the line to stop the destruction of the redwoods. In 1997, one activist took that to the extreme. Her name was Julia Butterfly Hill, and for 738 days, over 2 years, she lived 180 feet off the ground, perched in a 1,000-year-old redwood named Luna. Rain, wind, freezing cold, helicopters buzzing overhead, threats from loggers on the ground. Through it all, she refused to come down, determined to save Luna and bring global attention to the destruction of California's ancient forests. But the protests weren't without risk. In 1998, the conflict turned deadly. A young activist named David Gypsy Chain was protesting near Grizzly Creek, deep in the woods. Loggers were felling trees nearby. Tensions were high. According to a witness, the loggers shouted warnings, but Chain didn't move fast enough, and a redwood crashed down, killing him instantly. The haunting audio from that day captured it all: angry voices, sounds of falling timber, then silence. Was it a tragic accident or something darker? Authorities called it a mishap, but for Chain's friends and family, it was proof that the battle for the redwoods had spiraled completely out of control. Public outrage exploded, news crews descended, lawsuits followed, and the pressure on Pacific Lumber and on government officials was impossible to ignore. In 1999, a deal was finally struck. Luna was spared, along with nearly 7,500 acres of old-growth redwood forest. The state and federal governments paid $480 million to create the Headwaters Forest Reserve, protecting what little remained of these ancient giants. It wasn't a total victory. Thousands of acres were still lost, and the collapse of the logging economy devastated communities like Scotia. But it proved one thing: ordinary people can stand up to billion-dollar corporations, and sometimes they win.
By the early 2000s, the damage was done. The forests were scarred, the mills were shuttered, the town of Scotia, once a thriving company town, was broken. Pacific Lumber filed for bankruptcy in 2007. The following year, the company and the town and the people that knew it collapsed. But the story didn't end there. A new company stepped in, the Humboldt Redwood Company. They promised a different approach: no more clear-cutting of old-growth redwoods, a focus on sustainable logging, and a long-term stewardship with the land. It's not perfect. The scars on the forest and the community run deep. But for some, it's a second chance. A chance to do better than those who came before. Today the redwoods still stand, at least some of them. But the legacy of Pacific Lumber, well, that's more complicated. Some say the activists saved the forest. Others say destroyed the town. And maybe everyone, the trees, the workers, the community, were just casualties of corporate greed. The unanswered question still lingers. Greed, murder, protest, a modern American tragedy hidden in the woods of Northern California. What do you think? Was this a victory for the environment? A disaster for the working people? or both? Let us know in the comments. And if you thought the Bisbee deportation was wild, this is just the beginning. Stick with us because America's hidden history runs deep. Hit that like and subscribe. We're off the beaten path.